You've been avoiding someone your entire life, and that person is yourself. There's a part of you hidden in the shadows of your consciousness that contains everything you refuse to admit. And Carl Jung discovered that the day you meet this shadow is the day you truly begin to live. Imagine for a moment that everything you reject about yourself doesn't disappear, doesn't vanish, doesn't dissolve into thin air. Instead, it grows in the depths of your unconscious, gaining strength with each denial, each time you turn your face away from who you really are. Jung called this the shadow, the sum of all the rejected, repressed, and unlived parts of our personality. And here's the most disturbing truth. The more you run from it, the more power it has over your life. Most of us spend our entire lives constructing an elaborate mask. You know this mask intimately. It's the version of you that smiles at family gatherings, that posts on social media, that presents to the world as if it were the real you. Jung called this the persona, and there's nothing wrong with having one. The problem begins when you believe the mask is all you are, when you forget that beneath it exists an entire universe of unadmitted desires, unexpressed anger, unconfronted fears. Think about those people who trigger disproportionate irritation in you. That arrogant coworker, that person on social media who shows off too much, the corrupt politician you despise. Jung would say something that might deeply disturb you. What irritates you most in others is often a reflection of what you cannot accept in yourself. It's your shadow projected onto the external world, because it's easier to fight it out there than to admit it lives within you. But why do we do this? Why do we create this internal division that fragments us? The answer is buried in our childhood, in those moments when we learned that certain parts of us weren't acceptable. Maybe you learned that showing anger was ugly, that crying was weakness, that being too ambitious was selfish, that desire was sin. Each of these lessons created a small fracture in your wholeness, pushing genuine aspects of who you are into the shadows. And so you grew up believing that goodness means never feeling anger, that being strong means never showing vulnerability, that being a good person means never having dark thoughts. But let me tell you a secret that society doesn't want you to know. True goodness doesn't come from the absence of evil, but from recognizing and integrating it. True strength doesn't come from the absence of weakness, but from the conscious acceptance of our human fragility. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to have a magnetic presence, an authenticity that's almost palpable? They're not the perfect people. They're the ones who somehow made peace with their imperfections. They're the ones who descended into the dark basement of their souls and came back whole. They met their shadow, and instead of running away terrified, they sat down with it for an honest conversation. Now, you might be thinking, but isn't it dangerous to accept our shadow parts? Won't we become terrible people if we embrace our anger, our envy, our most primitive desires? And here's where Jung was genius in his understanding of the human psyche. He realized that the danger isn't in recognizing the shadow. The danger is in denying it. Because what you don't recognize consciously controls you unconsciously. Think about all the times you exploded at someone you loved and then wondered where all that anger came from, or when you sabotaged an important opportunity and couldn't understand why, or when you found yourself repeating destructive patterns, swearing each time would be the last. That's your shadow acting behind the scenes, directing the show while you believe you're in control. There's a fascinating phenomenon Jung observed. The more a person identifies with the light, with being good and pure, the denser and more dangerous their shadow becomes. That's why we so often see religious leaders in sex scandals, politicians who preach morality involved in corruption, super protective parents who end up suffocating their children. The shadow always finds a way to express itself, and when we don't give it a conscious channel, it explodes in destructive ways. But how do we begin this process of meeting our shadow? How do we descend into this underworld without getting lost in the darkness? The first step is developing what Jung called moral courage. The willingness to look at yourself honestly, without judgment, but also without excuses. It's like standing before a mirror that shows not just your face, but your entire soul, with all its contradictions and complexities. If this idea has already resonated with you, imagine what comes next. Because the process of meeting your shadow isn't just about recognizing your denied parts, it's about recovering the immense power that's trapped in them. Every aspect of you that was pushed into the shadows carries with it a vital energy you need to live fully. Your repressed anger might contain your ability to set healthy boundaries. Your denied sadness might hold your capacity for genuine compassion. Your forbidden desires might hide your most authentic creativity. I'll share something that's rarely discussed about shadow work. It's profoundly uncomfortable. It's not a beautiful or inspiring process in the traditional sense. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's confrontational. You'll encounter versions of yourself you'd prefer not to know. The envious self, the cruel self, the cowardly self, the petty self. And the hardest part of all, you need to embrace each of them, not with approval of their behaviors, but with acceptance of their existence. There's a story that perfectly illustrates this process. A man spent years cultivating an image of being generous and altruistic. He donated to charity, helped his neighbors, always had a smile on his face. But inside, there was growing resentment. He secretly despised those he helped, saw them as weak and unworthy. This was his shadow, the selfishness and contempt he couldn't admit. One day in therapy, he finally expressed these dark feelings, and something remarkable happened. By admitting his selfishness, his generosity became real for the first time. He no longer needed to help others to prove he was good. He could choose to help, aware of his mixed motivations, and this conscious choice had a completely different value. This is what Jung meant when he said, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." True transformation doesn't come from becoming better people in the conventional sense. It comes from becoming whole people, complete, who embrace the totality of their human experience. But here's something most people don't understand about the shadow. It doesn't contain only our negative aspects. Jung spoke about the golden shadow, the bright and powerful parts of ourselves that we also repress. Maybe you learned that being extraordinary was dangerous, that drawing attention was vanity, that your natural talents made others feel bad. So you dimmed your light, hid your gifts, pretended to be less than you are. How many times have you sabotaged yourself when you were about to achieve something great? How many times have you convinced yourself you didn't deserve that promotion, that relationship, that happiness? This is also your shadow acting. The golden shadow that's as afraid to shine as the dark shadow is to be seen. The process of shadow integration is like a delicate dance between opposites. You need to be strong enough to face your weakness, brave enough to admit your fear, humble enough to recognize your arrogance. It's a living paradox, and it's exactly in this paradox that lies the key to an authentic life. Let me tell you about a phenomenon you've probably experienced but never named. You know when you're in a relationship and suddenly your partner starts to deeply irritate you with small things. The way they chew, how they laugh, mannerisms that were once neutral or even charming now provoke disproportionate anger. Jung would say, this is your shadow being activated by the other. The intimate relationship functions as a merciless mirror that reflects parts of you that you'd prefer to keep hidden. That's why relationships are such intense battlefields for personal growth. They don't just show you who you are when everything is fine. They reveal who you are under pressure, in conflict, in vulnerability. And if you have the courage to look instead of just blaming the other, you'll find pure gold for your personal development. But there's an even deeper secret that few know about shadow work. When you truly integrate your shadow, something magical happens. You stop being controlled by opposites. Good and evil, right and wrong, light and darkness. These rigid categories begin to dissolve into something more fluid, more human, more real. You develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in creative tension without needing to resolve the contradiction. Imagine living without the compulsive need to always be good, without the paralyzing fear of being bad. Imagine the freedom of being simply human with all the complexity that implies. That's the promise of shadow work, not perfection, but wholeness, not holiness, but authenticity. Now you might be wondering, how do I do this in practice? How do I begin this journey of meeting my shadow? There are several doorways, and I'll share some of the most powerful. First, pay attention to what emotionally triggers you disproportionately. If something in someone intensely irritates you, ask yourself, where does this quality live in me? Not as an accusation, but as curious investigation. Second, observe your dreams. Jung considered dreams as letters the unconscious sends us every night. In them, your shadow often appears as threatening figures, pursuers, or same-sex people with qualities you despise or envy. Instead of running from these dream figures, try to dialogue with them. Ask what they want, what they have to teach you. Third, examine your projections. When you intensely admire someone, you're projecting your golden shadow. When you despise someone, you're projecting your dark shadow. In both cases, you're seeing in the other what you can't see in yourself. Use these projections as maps to your unexplored inner world. But here's an important warning. This work shouldn't be done alone, especially in the beginning. The shadow is called shadow for a reason. It exists outside consciousness's field of vision. It's very difficult to see our own blind spots. A Jungian therapist, a personal development group, or even a very honest and compassionate friend can serve as a mirror and support on this journey. And there's something crucial that needs to be said. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting from it impulsively. Just because you recognize your anger doesn't mean you should go around attacking people. Just because you accept your shadow desires doesn't mean you should fulfill them all. Integration is about awareness, not impulsive action. It's about conscious choice, not unconscious libertinage. What happens when you don't do this work? When you keep running from your shadow? Jung was clear about this. You live a half-life, a black and white life when it could be in color. A two-dimensional life when it could be three-dimensional. You become what he called a one-sided person, someone identified with only a narrow part of themselves, living in a self-imposed psychic prison. Worse still, your unintegrated shadow doesn't disappear. It's passed on. To your children, who unconsciously absorb everything you can't face. To your relationships, which carry the weight of your projections. To the world, which receives the discharge of your unprocessed darkness. Jung had a powerful phrase about this. What we do and bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. Think about that for a moment. How many patterns in your life that you call bad luck, destiny, or others' fault are actually your shadow creating situations to be seen? How many times have you attracted exactly the type of person or situation you most feared? This isn't coincidence. It's your psyche desperately trying to integrate what was split. But when you do the work, when you descend to the underworld of your psyche and return, something extraordinary happens. You develop what Jung called individuation. You become who you really are, not who you think you should be. You stop living according to scripts written by others and start writing your own story. And here's the most surprising revelation of all. When you integrate your shadow, you don't become a worse person. You become more compassionate. Because now you know darkness intimately, you can have compassion for others' darkness. You stop judging so harshly because you know we all carry the same seeds of light and shadow. You become, paradoxically, more luminous for having embraced your darkness. There's a quality in people who've done this work that's unmistakable. They have a solid presence, as if they completely occupy their space in the world. They don't need to prove anything because they're not hiding anything. They can laugh at their own contradictions because they're no longer at war with themselves. They love more deeply because they know the depths. They live more courageously because they've already faced their worst fears, the fears about themselves. This is the great irony of shadow work. By accepting that you're not as good as you'd like to believe, you become better than you ever imagined possible. By admitting your capacity for evil, you choose good more authentically. By embracing your weakness, you find your true strength. Jung once said he'd rather be a whole individual than be good. This isn't a license for immorality. It's an invitation to integrity in the deepest sense of the word. The integration of all your parts into a coherent whole, even if complex. It's an invitation to stop wasting psychic energy, maintaining internal division, and use that energy to live fully. The day you meet your shadow is the day you stop running from yourself. It's the day you accept the invitation to the most challenging and rewarding adventure of all. The journey to become who you really are. It's not a destination you reach once and done. It's an ongoing process of discovery, acceptance, and integration. And perhaps the most beautiful thing of all is this: when you embrace your shadow, you discover it wasn't your enemy. It was a lost part of yourself, waiting in the dark all this time to be recognized, accepted, and finally brought home. It was the guardian of your most authentic power, disguised as a monster to test your courage. So I leave you with this question that could change everything. What are you waiting for to truly start living? Your shadow is already there, influencing every decision, every relationship, every moment of your life. The only real choice is whether you'll continue being governed by it unconsciously, or whether you'll have the courage to face it, know it, and finally integrate it. The life you've always wanted to live, the person you've always known you could be, isn't in some distant future after you fix yourself. It's on the other side of meeting your shadow. It's in the radical acceptance of your complete humanity. It's in the courage to be imperfect, contradictory, and magnificently human. Carl Jung left us a map for this journey. He showed us that the path to light necessarily passes through darkness, that wholeness is more valuable than perfection, that the day you meet your shadow is not the day your life ends, it's the day it finally begins. If this message touched something in you, if you felt that shiver of recognition, that mix of fear and excitement that comes when we touch a deep truth, then you've already begun the journey. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment which part of yourself you're most afraid to meet. And subscribe, because this is just one conversation in a much larger journey of discovering what it means to be truly, courageously, completely human. Remember, you're not broken and don't need to be fixed. You're divided and need to be integrated. And on the day you embrace all your parts, light and shadow, you'll discover you were always whole. You had just forgotten.